Good evening, my friends. Wherever this finds you tonight, I hope it meets you in peace. Because what follows may disturb that peace. It began at exactly 2:30 a.m. in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The city slept under curfew. Street lights flickered against the red dust. Even the wind moved quietly through the iron gates of the presidential compound. Then, silence shattered. A single flash on the western fence, a dull explosion. Then the staccato of gunfire that rolled through the night like thunder trapped inside walls. Within minutes, communications collapsed. Cell towers went dark, radios jammed, the city's heartbeat stopped. Security cameras caught only fragments. Black SUVs without plates, headlights off, moving with the precision of men who had rehearsed this before. Soldiers on duty swore they saw antennas mounted on the vehicles, the kind used by intelligence units, not ordinary troops. Inside, elite guards rushed to defend the president's residence. One survivor later whispered, "They moved like ghosts. No shouting, no hesitation." Bullets tore through the courtyard walls, sparks lighting the night sky. For nearly 15 minutes, the future of a nation hung on the pull of triggers and the courage of a handful of men who refused to fall back. By 2:46 a.m., counterfire erupted. The attackers withdrew into the dark, leaving only scorch marks and silence. Across the capital, people awoke to confusion. Flickering phones, distant sirens, no news. Mothers held children close. Vendors prayed the dawn would come. What no one yet knew was that this was not random violence. According to early defense reports, the assault bore foreign fingerprints, synchronized timing, electronic interference, and an exactness beyond any local faction. And so the question rises, who wanted Captain Ibrahim Traoré dead? And why now? Was this the work of domestic traitors, or a message from far beyond Africa's borders? If you believe truth deserves a voice, stay with me, because tonight, we pull back the curtain on a story most newsrooms will never dare to tell. When the gunfire faded, the silence that followed was heavier than smoke. By dawn, the capital had turned into a city of whispers. Every street carried its own version of the same question. Who did this? At sunrise, armored vehicles blocked the main roads leading to the Kosiam district. Soldiers moved with slow, deliberate steps, eyes scanning rooftops. The presidential compound was sealed. No journalists, no civilians, only the hum of drones circling overhead. Inside, investigators in plain fatigues combed through the debris. What they found turned fear into something colder. Realization. Near the western wall, they recovered fragments of small drones, each piece marked with foreign serial codes. Letters and numbers engraved in a language not native to Burkina Faso. A shattered communications rig was retrieved from a ditch beside the main road, its casing scorched but intact. The technicians recognized the model instantly. It wasn't Burkinab nor regional. It was Western, contractor grade, the kind used in operations where deniability is built in. At the command center, a young analyst named Suleiman scrolled through digital noise, frequency maps, interference logs, raw packet data. He noticed a pattern. Signal jamming synchronized to the minute with the explosion. Every data line traced back to a cluster of IP nodes routed through civilian data centers in West Africa, bouncing through encrypted relays before disappearing somewhere across the Mediterranean. He looked up and said quietly, "They didn't come to kill. They came to send a message." That single line echoed through the room. By mid-morning, the Defense Council met in emergency session. Reports on the table described what officials called a hybrid assault, part physical, part electronic, part psychological. The term was new to many, but its meaning was clear. A nation under attack without a declaration of war. No armies crossing borders, no flags, just precision and silence. Outside, ordinary life tried to resume, but it felt forced. The market opened late. Children stayed home. Taxi drivers avoided government buildings. Rumors filled the gaps left by official silence. Foreign mercenaries, inside betrayal, drones guided by satellites. Each story contradicted the next, yet all shared one truth. People were afraid. In a small cafe near the university, an elderly teacher named Jacques adjusted his radio antenna, hoping for a stable signal. He told the few customers gathered around, "You can take a man's comfort, but not his curiosity." Then the signal cracked, and the announcer's voice emerged. "The president is safe. Investigations are underway." It was meant to reassure, but it sounded rehearsed, too calm for the weight of what had happened. Within the walls of the intelligence service, forensic teams catalogued evidence: encrypted radios, tactical gear, night vision optics, foreign-made drones. Each discovery narrowed the possibilities, and each one pointed outward. Still, the official statement remained cautious. No foreign involvement confirmed. But inside those briefings, officers exchanged glances that said otherwise. One investigator later admitted under anonymity, "Everything about this was clean, too clean. Whoever planned it had access to satellite imagery, military schematics, even the timing of internal patrols. That doesn't happen by accident." By evening, the Ministry of Information declared a state of heightened vigilance. The airspace remained closed. Curfews were extended. Internet access flickered on and off across districts, as digital forensics units hunted for cyber traces of the attacker's coordination. Each blackout deepened the unease. Meanwhile, whispers of foreign interest began circulating among diplomats. In Geneva, a European defense analyst privately told a regional correspondent, "The tactics used here, simultaneous jamming, decoy maneuvers, layered interference, are textbook signals of a contractor-assisted operation. We've seen this before." His statement, though never published officially, spread like wildfire across encrypted channels. By the time it reached Burkina Faso's military command, it was already shaping the investigation. Within 48 hours, the nation realized this was no mere coup. This was intelligence-level warfare, a shadow conflict unfolding behind the curtain of peace. For citizens of a small landlocked country, the revelation was staggering. They were witnessing the rules of war rewritten, fought not with battalions but with bandwidth, not by invasion, but by infiltration. As Suleiman's final report reached the president's desk, one sentence stood out in red ink. "Evidence suggests coordination from beyond our borders, utilizing hybrid assets and potential regional proxies." For the defense establishment, it was confirmation of their deepest fear. For the people, it was the beginning of a long night of doubt. Because now every foreign visitor, every unmarked vehicle, every dropped internet signal felt like another attack waiting to happen. The assault had failed, but the message had landed. And somewhere, beyond those quiet city lights, someone was watching to see how Burkina Faso would respond. Was this truly an assassination attempt, or the opening act of a much larger war fought in the shadows? Would your nation recognize the enemy if the invasion came without uniforms, without flags, only silence? Think about that, because the next part may change how you define war itself. By the following sunset, fear had spread like dust on the wind. Checkpoints lined every major road. The air smelled of burned fuel and worry. Then, without warning, every screen across the capital flickered back to life. Stoic television returned. No music, no fanfare. Just a flag swaying behind a wooden desk and then the man everyone thought might be dead. Captain Ibrahim Traoré looked straight into the camera. His uniform was rumpled, his voice low but steady. "Burkina Faso's sovereignty will not be negotiated. We will not bow, and we will not be bought." He didn't shout. He didn't name his enemies, but in that still room, every word struck like a drumbeat. To the people who had spent the morning whispering in fear, it felt like sunrise. Crowds began to form outside almost instinctively. Women carried candles. Soldiers raised rifles in salute. And somewhere in the crowd, a mother lifted her child onto her shoulder so he could see the man on the giant outdoor screen. "That's the one who stayed," she told him. "That's why you still have a country." Phones buzzed across the nation as clips of the speech spread through encrypted apps. Each replay rekindled something deeper than hope. It awakened pride. Men who had spent the night guarding doorways returned to the streets wearing red armbands, symbols of blood spilled for freedom. Churches opened their doors. In mosques, imams prayed for the soldiers who had died defending the compound. Faith became the language of defiance. Inside the palace, Traoré met with his generals. They urged caution. He insisted on presence. "If they strike again," he said, "they must see that I am still standing." That decision changed everything. The next morning, he walked through the shattered courtyard, stopping at each bullet mark as though counting blessings. Photographs of that walk spread faster than official statements. The image of a young captain against broken walls became an icon, the symbol of a nation that refused to kneel. Western networks called him impulsive. African newspapers called him inevitable. But in homes across the continent, elders whispered verses older than borders. Those who plant faith in the storm reap freedom when the sun returns. By the second day, the unity was visible. Students held vigils for fallen guards. Farmers offered food to military canteens. In marketplaces, vendors left handwritten signs on their stalls. "We sell nothing to fear." For a population long accustomed to uncertainty, this collective courage was something new, a spiritual armor. Yet even amid celebration, a question lingered. Had a red line just been crossed? The attack had failed, but its echo reached foreign capitals. Diplomats demanded explanations, analysts speculated about retaliation, and international broadcasters debated whether Burkina Faso was stabilizing or slipping into isolation. Still, for the people living through it, politics felt distant. What they saw was simpler. A man who faced death and stood unbroken. That, to them, was faith made visible. At night, churches filled again. Candles burned low as pastors reminded congregations that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite it. One old priest said during a service, "When the lion roars in darkness, the herd remembers its heartbeat." His words spread across social media under a single phrase: "Africa will not bow." In this moment, Traoré's message transcended borders. Across Mali, Niger, and beyond, soldiers and civilians alike watched the replay of his calm declaration. For them, it wasn't merely about one leader. It was about reclaiming the right to stand on African soil without permission. The foreign powers who once defined stability now faced something they couldn't quantify: belief. Not in ideology, but in destiny. For decades, Africa's story had been told through reports and resolutions. That night, it was rewritten through faith and defiance. And as the candles burned through the quiet streets of Ouagadougou, a single truth glimmered through the smoke. Sometimes the most powerful weapon a nation possesses is the conviction that it was chosen to survive. Was this unity the birth of renewal, or the calm before a second, more invisible strike? If you believe faith can outlast fear, share this moment. Because the story of a people who refuse to bow is the story every free nation must remember. As dawn broke on the third day, the echo of gunfire had faded, but the tremor it left behind reached far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In capital cities across Africa and Europe, intelligence briefings began before sunrise. Screens lit up with maps of the Sahel, dotted with red circles and blinking alerts. The headlines were cautious: "Security incident in Burkina Faso." But behind closed doors, the tone was anything but calm. What had been dismissed as another failed coup now looked like something else entirely: a warning shot in a wider, quieter war. In Geneva, a European defense analyst whispered to a colleague, "The fingerprints are familiar." In Washington, a congressional staffer drafted a memo titled "Concerning Escalation." And in Paris, military planners studied satellite images of Ouagadougou, marking the angles of the assault and the blackout radius. The pattern was surgical: too professional for rebels, too deniable for nations. The conclusion everyone avoided putting on paper was the one everyone understood. This was not just Burkina Faso's crisis. It was the visible crack in a global order. Officially, the responses came quickly and predictably. The African Union condemned any attempt to destabilize a sovereign state. ECOWAS urged dialogue and restraint. The US State Department released a brief statement. The United States supports stability and the democratic transition of Burkina Faso. We categorically deny any involvement. In Brussels, a NATO spokesperson went further, insisting that the alliance operates transparently and in accordance with international law. To diplomats, these were routine lines. To the Burkina people, they sounded like echoes from the past, because they remembered the pattern. First came the words of concern, then came the conditions, and finally came the interference. On local radio, an old journalist summed up the public mood bluntly. We've heard this song before. It always starts with sympathy and ends with soldiers. Within hours, those statements ignited a second battlefront, the information war. Western news networks framed the incident as a possible internal power struggle. African broadcasters countered with investigative reports hinting at foreign orchestration. On social media, two realities collided. Anonymous accounts posted grainy photos of captured foreigners. Others claimed the president had been evacuated abroad. The truth was drowned beneath speculation. In Bamako, a cybersecurity expert warned, "This is the new phase of destabilization, not through bombs, but through confusion." He called it psychological warfare by bandwidth. Every rumor was a bullet, every false headline a detonator. And as misinformation spread, fear began to look like proof. Meanwhile, in Washington, think tanks started updating old files. Memos circulated with titles like Managing African Nationalism and Mitigating Regional Realignment. The language was technical, but the meaning was simple. The world was watching an idea: African sovereignty begin to organize itself. And to those who once wrote the rules, that idea was dangerous. In Moscow, the foreign ministry issued a statement of solidarity against external manipulation. In Beijing, a spokesperson said, "Sovereignty must be respected in all forms." Both capitals framed the event as evidence that Africa was under siege by invisible hands. Western analysts dismissed those claims as propaganda, yet privately admitted they feared the same conclusion, that the West's monopoly on influence was slipping. For the ordinary viewer in the United States, this story seemed distant, another headline from a continent they rarely heard about. But behind the distance lies a mirror, because many of the defense contractors' intelligence systems and stability programs that operate in Africa are funded by the very tax dollars of those watching the evening news. What happens in Ouagadougou doesn't stay there. It reflects the machinery that has defined global power for decades. Inside Burkina Faso, that truth resonated deeply. Citizens gathered in small groups to discuss what they heard online. One mechanic put it best: "If they denied this fast, it means we were right to suspect them." The more the outside world tried to explain the attack away, the more Burkina citizens felt certain it was real proof of foreign interference. The irony was brutal. Denial became confirmation. By the week's end, Burkina Faso stood at the center of a storm that no longer involved just soldiers or spies, but perception itself. Every statement, every rumor, every denial shifted alliances. The old idea that small nations could be controlled by silence was falling apart. In the information age, silence now spoke the loudest. If words can shape wars before the first bullet is fired, what happens when entire nations begin to question who writes their truth? Before you scroll away, ask yourself, who benefits when you stop believing your own eyes? Because sometimes the quietest headlines hide the loudest lies. Across the ocean, the story of the night attack reached Western screens as a brief headline: Burkina Faso thwarts coup attempt. For most viewers, it vanished with the next news cycle. But behind closed doors, the conversation was far from over. In Washington, analysts used another phrase: concerning escalation. In think tanks and intelligence meetings, Experts spoke in careful tones about regional instability and anti-Western sentiment. They were watching something bigger than a failed plot. They were watching the foundations of influence shift. For decades, Africa was treated as a chessboard of aid, bases, and resources. But now, a new generation of leaders, young, unapologetic, and fiercely independent, was rewriting the script. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's defiance wasn't just political. It was philosophical. He stood for a truth few dared to say aloud: that Africa didn't need permission to protect itself. And that message was contagious. In Mali, Niger, and beyond, soldiers and the students shared clips of his speech. What began as one nation's survival had become a continent's declaration. In Washington, newspapers circulated quietly under titles like "Managing Sovereignty Movements in Africa." The subtext was clear. Independence was becoming too popular. The fear wasn't that Burkina Faso might fall, but that it might inspire. Because if one small nation could resist, others might follow. And when the powerless stop asking for permission, the powerful lose their leverage. Europe too shifted uneasily. France, expelled from several Sahel nations, kept silent but watched closely. The European Union called for dialogue and democratic restoration, code words Africans had long learned to read as pressure. Meanwhile, Moscow and Beijing stepped forward, framing the attack as proof of Western subversion. The battle lines were no longer drawn on maps, but in narratives, between those who saw Africa as dependent and those who saw it as destiny. To the American viewer, this made me feel distant, yet the reflection is personal. Because every drone, every private military contract, every cyber tool used abroad bears the imprint of policies funded at home. And the question now lingers: if sovereignty can be sabotaged in silence, how much of the world's stability is real? The bullets in Ouagadougou may have missed their mark, but their echoes are reaching every capital that once believed control was eternal. Ask yourself tonight, if freedom were tested in silence, would your nation still recognize its own reflection? The dust has settled, but the silence that followed has a different sound now. It's the sound of a nation learning to breathe again, slowly, carefully, defiantly. The bullet holes have been patched, the walls repainted, but the memory remains carved into the minds of those who lived through the night. They tried to erase a leader and instead awakened a country. Burkina Faso is not the same. Its markets are quieter, its curfews longer, its alliances sharper. Yet amid the fear, something unbreakable has taken root. Teachers speak of sovereignty as if it were scripture. Children draw the flag beside the words, "We will not bow." Soldiers patrol not out of habit, but with conviction. The nation's wounds have become armor. But beyond its borders, the storm still builds. Sanctions loom. Contracts shift. Diplomats whisper. The same invisible forces that once tried to decide Africa's fate are still moving. Only now, they face a continent no longer asleep. Because in the quiet streets of Ouagadougou, people understand what the rest of the world is beginning to realize. That sovereignty is not declared in speeches. It's defended in silence, in unity, and in the refusal to kneel. Captain Ibrahim Traoré walks slower these days, his words fewer, his tone heavier. But in that restraint lies power. His calm is not surrender, it's strategy. Each appearance carries the weight of a truth that no weapon could silence. That faith and awareness are the new front lines of freedom. And whether you stand in Washington, Paris, or Bamako, the message is the same. Africa will no longer ask for permission to exist. In the end, this story is not just about a man who survived the night. It's about a continent that refused to die quietly. The war for Africa's independence has entered a new phase, fought not with armies, but with algorithms, influence, and faith. So remember this moment. The next time the lights flicker in some distant capital, and the world pretends not to see, you'll know the truth. The struggle never ended. It only changed its disguise. If this story has touched your heart, share it. If you believe in justice, in faith, in the right of every nation to stand free. Carry this message forward. Because when silence becomes the battlefield, awareness becomes the shield. May God bless the people of Burkina Faso and every land that dares to rise in the dark.